Good morning, everyone. My name is Good morning, everyone. My name is Chairwoman Felicia Porter. It is. My name is Chairwoman Felicia Porter. I am the chair of the Public Health and Environment Committee. And today we are having our second oversight hearing related to the oversight of the opioid restitution funds. For the purpose of assessing the allocation and impact of the opioid restitution funds, ensuring that they are utilized effectively to support evidence-based strategy that benefits the city's most vulnerable population. I want to thank you all for coming here today. First, I want to just recognize our Inspector General in the back of the room. Thank you for coming, ma'am. But first, I just want to highlight one of the reasons why we are here today. As you all know, this opioid crisis on the heels of the mass overdose that has happened in Penn North, these conversations are becoming more and more important as we navigate this crisis in Baltimore. Not only are we at a precipice of looking at this crisis from a public health perspective, but we are also at an opportunity to look at this crisis to really have a foundation of what accountability looks like. So just to ground us in the conversation, when I talk about accountability from the council's perspective, that means looking at and reviewing where these funds are appropriated, having an evaluation criteria with regard of how we are utilizing these funds, and more importantly, making sure that these funds are impactful within our respective districts. The opioid crisis just doesn't touch one of the councilmatic districts, it touches the entire nation. And so as we begin to have these conversations, let us be grounded in a space of healing, let us be grounded in a space of accountability, but also let us be grounded in the space that this is going to take incremental steps to get us out of this crisis, but also to enhance the quality of life for all those here in Baltimore. So we're gonna start by turning it over to thank you, Marguerite. We're gonna start by turning it over to Sarah Whaley, the Executive Director. But first I want to recognize the members that are here today. Committee member, Councilman Mark Conway from the 4th District, Vice Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
We also have Councilman Mark Parker from the 1st District. And then last but certainly not least, we also have Councilwoman Odette Ramos from the 14th District.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much. Before we go into our presentation from Executive Director Whaley, I want to start with public testimony. And that's just a standard practice here in the Public Health and Environment Committee. I understand that you all spend your time to take off work to come here and testify on behalf of your community, on behalf of your organization. And so typically in the Public Health and Environment Committee, we start with public testimony because I want all of the agencies, all of the council members to hear what you are talking about, and then we will go into agency presentations and then questions from council members. So we're gonna start with public testimony. Just as a reminder, please say your name when you are testifying. You will have 2 minutes. For a few members, under my discretion, will have upwards of 5 minutes given their role and their expertise to this cause. So who do we have first, Marguerite? Perfect. Mr. David Fell, you have 5 minutes.
On the other side.
And I believe there's some more. Yep, thank you. Thank you. Hello. Oh, if you can turn on the mic and come closer, please. Thank you, and if you can just hit it. There you are.
Ah, the red light means on.
Yes. And you have 5 minutes.
Okay.
5
Hi.
minutes.
Well, I feel at a height disadvantage here. Anyway, nice to meet you all. Yeah? Oh, okay. I'm Deborah Agus, and I'm the Executive Director of the Behavioral Health Leadership Institute, and I work with Dave Fell, who will be introducing himself. BHLI was incorporated in 2003. We have a mission to provide the highest quality substance use disorder treatment services to the most vulnerable populations in Baltimore City. We're led by a board of directors comprised of individuals from medical and behavioral health committee and representatives communities in Baltimore City. The chairman of our board is Dr. Lenny Feldman. BHLI is staffed by myself, Ayanna Fuse, Director of Operations, Dave Fell, who you'll hear from, Outreach Director, and a data manager. One of the most important projects we have is the P-Care van. That's what I'm going to talk about today. In 2017, BHLI launched its most ambitious project, Project Connections at Reentry, otherwise known as P-Care. Our goal is to provide medication for opioid use disorder to the most vulnerable populations in Baltimore City, including those being released from the Baltimore City Jail and those who are homeless. To make this work, we purchased a very large recreational vehicle, what we call the P-Care van. Project Connections at Reentry is our P-Care program. The goal of P-Care is to provide medication for opioid use disorders to the most vulnerable populations, including those who are being released from Baltimore City Jail and those who are homeless. So we park the van right outside the release door of the Baltimore City Jail, which is also very close to a lot of homeless shelters and encampments, so we are in the perfect spot to reach our population. And so we have this very large recreational vehicle that we park there outside the jail every day. Prior to launching this project, I met with the warden and the commissioner of the Baltimore City Jail, and they are very engaged in our project. We did that because we want to make sure that we talk to the people in jail, and we actually have someone who works with Dave's team who goes into the jail every week in the morning, talks to all the housing programs and talks to them about our project. It's really important. A lot of people are arrested for opioid use disorder, and a lot of people in the jail have opioid use disorder, and many of them don't have IDs when they come out, which is quite incredible and another topic, but they don't. And they don't have insurance for sure. So where are they going to go? Well, we're there right outside the door, and they know all about us. They look outside the window and they say, we see the van sitting out there, and they know when they come that we're there for them. We don't have any other requirements when someone comes out. All they have to say is, I have an opioid use disorder, or I think I do, and I want to have treatment. And we say, come on in. That's it. Once they're with our team, we have... Yeah, I'm going to let Dave come in and talk about the outreach team in a minute. So I just wanted to say that we have the highest quality clinical team. We have physicians, nurses from all of the medical institutions in the area. They give us a few hours a week, and that way we can employ the best quality program that we have. We have a full-time nurse, and we have an outreach team that Dave will be talking about, and we provide services with physicians and nurse practitioners who work a few hours a week. Finally, to provide medications, we have a unique arrangement with several pharmacies who our patients don't have to pay when they come in. We just get billed by them periodically. So our patients don't have to do anything except come. Since we began, we've served a total of 3,080 unique individuals and provided close to 56,000 interactions with patients. When you build it, they will come, is what we say. Once we opened the P-Care van and our other sites, people started coming every day. Every day we have new people. Every day people walk by and stop at the van to ask about treatment or ask about what we do. We're here today to request more funding so that we can continue to expand and provide this unique and critical service to as many people as possible. With that, I want to introduce Dave Fell, who is our Director of Outreach Programs.
Hi, I'm Dave Fell. I'm the outreach manager at the BHLI Clinic. I know we're running a little bit short on time. So we are all aware of the horrific mass overdose event that transpired last Thursday in Penn North. It was another trauma experienced by a neighborhood that has been relentlessly assaulted with traumatic events over the years, always followed by promises from governments, community orgs that help is on the way. And a lot of times it is. But as soon as that, the attention and those services kind of fade away as the traumatic event kind of fades into the background. I've read a lot of the articles published recently about the fallout from this event, and I was particularly struck by a portion of an article in the Banner regarding a woman who experienced an overdose while trying one of the free testers that were, supposed to be what caused the wave of overdoses. She talks about how she never wanted to stop after 45 years of using, but this was the one that made her say, I've had enough. And she went directly after being released from the hospital to a treatment center, but because it was the weekend, it was closed. And so the point I'm trying to make is that these kinds of organizations, BHLI especially, are uniquely positioned to offer immediate help to people when they are ready to enter treatment. But we're severely limited in terms of hours of operation and staff, because very few of these orgs are able to secure the funding needed to truly be there when people need us the most. Let me just skip some of these things. Okay. So yeah, if BHLI had more funding, we could be open 8 to 10 hours a day, most of the days of the week. We could hire more dedicated harm reduction informed nurses, doctors, and peer outreach workers. We could expand our outreach work inside the jail. We could cover more costs of medication for uninsured individuals. We could cover transportation, not to mention one day we could even open another site up in Penn North to really be there where people are. Meeting people where they are is a phrase that embodies the harm reduction philosophy. So please help us help people when they need us most.
Thank you so much.
Can I just finish with one thing that's...
You have 30
One of the
seconds,
days I
ma'am.
came to the van at 7 o'clock and there was a man sitting there. He told me he'd been sitting there since 1 in the morning outside our spot, which he'd seen from the jail. And he said, I am not leaving here because every time I get out, I get arrested again. And I'm here to get treatment and I'm sitting here till they come. So
Thank
to
you so
Dave's point,
much.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank you
much.
for having us.
Of course, thank you. Next is Vin McCormick.
Good morning, Madam Chair and council members and all those who are in attendance. My name is Vin McCormick. I am the Executive Director of the New Life Recovery Center. And you touched on it, Madam Chair, as did the individuals who were before me. We had what I call a traumatic opioid event last week. And I'm sure most of you have heard, unless you are Rip Van Winkle. And for me, that was a all hands on deck moment, right? It shouldn't have mattered how long you've been in operation or how big you are as an organization. To me, that was an all hands on deck moment. And I appreciate Ms. Whaley for being down there and orchestrating some things. I applaud the administration. And if I could say there was a silver lining in that traumatic event, is that nobody as of this moment passed away, right? But the work still goes on. And what I've learned is that service, in the 5 years that New Life has been in operation, I've learned that service is not convenient. You're gonna have to move on times when you are supposed to be doing something else. Service is not comfortable. You're gonna have to shake the hand. You're gonna have to give the hug to somebody who doesn't look like you, they don't dress like you, and they probably won't smell like you, right? That's real service. And I can say that I'm here to talk about New Life, but I don't like to feel like I'm promoting it, but we do the work. Don't come to 110 St. Paul Street where we are. Go out with us when we put the table out and the water's for the people, because I understand most of them are thirsty. When we bought the small chips and the cookies, because most of them have not eaten in days, right? So before they can listen to me about coming into treatment, I gotta give them something to drink. I gotta give them something to eat. Sometimes they don't listen, right? But that's okay. There may be one in that group that came in that moment that listened. So we did have some people who came out of the Penn North event within the last week who came to treatment. I applaud that. So we're working very diligently, and I appreciate Ms. Wade. Well, there's a schedule. I hope she talks about it. The work still has to be done. So that event, we had the cameras come down, the mayor came down, he did what he needed to do procedurally and politically, and then all the cameras are gone. So right now the cameras are gone, the subway's open again, but I can tell you, because I was down there this morning, it's business as usual, right? So we have to be, and I appreciate this forum and what it's for. I appreciate your leadership and what you articulating and what you're trying to do. We have to bring some services to the people on a regular basis, meaning, so there's a phrase that we use, it's kind of cute. It says, we gotta meet the people at the level of their need. Uptown, we say, we gotta meet them where they at. Well, where they at? They not at 110, they on Penn North, they're at Penn and Lawrence, they're in East Baltimore. We have to go where they at on a regular basis, not just when there's an event. So we have to be more proactive. And one of the things I wish, and I said this when I was here last, this is my experience, right? Because that's all that matters. I don't believe that CBOs here in Baltimore are collaborative. I think they're territorial. And that happened before I got my license. But hopefully we can become less territorial, more collaborative, and we all can get together, because we shouldn't have a situation where we're mandated to get together to take service to the people. But, you know, I'm 61, maybe that'll happen before I leave here. So I appreciate what you're doing here. I appreciate what this forum is for, and I'm hoping that you can recognize that It's about the agencies that are actually doing the work. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next, we're gonna hear from Darcy Kerwin Garber.
Thank you, appreciate it. Good to see you. I'm Darcy Kerwin Garber. I'm with Baltimore Harm Reduction Coalition. We're a community-based public health organization. We're centralized in District 12, but have outreach sites in District 7, 12, and 14. So I know these 2 minutes go by very quickly, so I'll be direct and brief. Wanted to highlight the importance of transparency in the process of ORF funding, of knowing who's determining where these monies are going, how that determination is happening. I know that we have the ORF Advisory Board here in Baltimore, and that includes people with lived experience, people who have been working in community for decades with people who use drugs, and that is a crucial and important resource that our city can use. And so we hope that their recommendations will be taken seriously and earnestly when they make those recommendations for the use of ORF monies. Also, as people have said, and as you have said, part of this hearing is to ensure that ORF monies benefit the city's most vulnerable populations. And wanted to highlight and recognize the importance of community-based organizations to do just that. And we've also heard that, yes, there is often a lot of competition between CBOs, and that often happens because of lack of resources, unfortunately, even though we have the exact same goals for multiple different parts of the city and community. So CBOs, they're directly connected to the community and the neighbors that we serve with. I think one of the highlighting parts of community-based organizations also is that they're largely comprised of people with lived experience or living experience, either through themselves, through family, through friends. And so when we're talking about, we can look at prevention and care, and then we're also looking at what does repair and what does moving forward look like, and what does healing look like. And so making sure that there are employment opportunities for people with lived experience, that there is financial stability, that there is connection. When we invest in CBOs, we are also investing in that type of repair and that type of healing. I know this is a difficult topic with ORF monies, also because we know we only have this money because there has been almost indescribable pain and suffering and harm and death. And that is why we have this money now. And this money will never compare to the lives that have been lost. But we know that now that we have this money, we have to make sure that we make it count. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we're going to hear from Candy Kerr.
Now I'm calling you, Darcy, sorry.
Hi, my name's Candy Kerr. I work at Baltimore Harm Reduction Coalition. I'm also a member of the Bridges Coalition for Overdose Prevention Centers. I'm grateful to be able to stand in front of you today and talk to y'all. Thank you for everybody that's been making moves since last Thursday for the mass overdose event that happened. Continued tragedy in an area that has continued to it's not forgotten because Baltimore Harm Reduction Coalition and other organizations have been there for the last 6 to 7 years providing outreach services. But in the grand scheme of things, we know that, or at least I know that systemic racism has been plaguing that area for centuries. It feels like centuries. So we're here to talk about money, we're here to talk about money and a few things. I think the territorial nature is a real thing, and I think it's a real thing and for multiple reasons. One of those is because of the competitive nature of the grants. We have a crap ton of money, and I feel like now is an opportunity for us to be able to use that money in a more generous way that has happened previously. And so I'm grateful that we're using it for some city agencies because that's a necessity, obviously, but also an opportunity to use more of that money for community-based organizations so that we can breathe a little bit easier, so BHLI can get what they need to be able to provide, so the BHRC can too. So that competitive nature is a little bit less, that you know what I'm gonna say, that nature is a little bit less. Another piece to that territory thing though that I think is, could could be controversial, but I think is also a little bit of a necessity, is that in situations like what happened last Thursday, community-based organizations that work in that area, if they are further funded and have the opportunity to spend more of their time in that area, they will be encountering, like the people of that community will be encountering people that they trust, people that they've worked with for the last 6 years, people that they know, as opposed to having an influx of people from the outside come in, which is incredibly necessary, and I'm super grateful that that's done. And also it can have the effect of causing more trauma on the area. And so territory, controversial, all that jazz. Overdose, I think the overdose money, we got a lot of it, and we could use this opportunity to spend it more generously.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Appreciate you. Next, we're going to hear from Damon Marshall. You have 5 minutes.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Last Thursday's overdose incident came a day after the Office of Overdose Response held its first community meeting, which looked to get thoughts from members of the community on how to use millions of dollars in settlement funds. I attended that meeting, and I found it to be a step in the right direction. But personally, I didn't leave the meeting feeling any different about the opioid crisis than before I came. Although the meeting seemed helpful, I couldn't help but leave there feeling disappointed because decisions have already been made and the bulk of the funds had already been allocated. The mayor speaks about being transparent and how things will be different this time, but yet the funds were allocated to the same people and organizations that have been receiving the funds from City of Baltimore for a very long time, with not much happening from them. It would have been refreshing to know that some of the money was allocated to a few of the newer or different community leaders, treatment programs, or nonprofit organizations who are really making an impact in the community. This would have showed that they are indeed researching and trying to find the best possible options for the opioid crisis instead of going with the status quo. I hope that my feelings are wrong. I say this not to say that the initiative was not an important one, but to highlight that it's not impactful enough for the crisis that we are facing. I spoke with many members of the community, and they are skeptical of the promises that are being made. These same promises have been made time and time again with no results or outcome. It's been years, and there hasn't been any significant investment in the community. And I think our leaders have underestimated the community's awareness of these unfulfilled promises. I think the overdose strategic plan is a good start. Although it's true that members of the community want to be heard, and they are thankful for the opportunity to share their feelings on these issues, but more importantly, they also want to be led. I think this is where the frustration between residents and our political leaders stems from. Many residents of Baltimore feel they elected government officials into office to protect them and their interests, and the elected government officials have fallen short. Because to them, many of the problems have not been addressed. They don't feel enough is being done by lawmakers or the police department. These are the people they trusted to provide solutions with smart decision-making and critical thinking. The opioid and mental health crisis is a complex one, and there is no one step or one answer approach. But I myself have a few questions. Maybe they can get answered today or taken note of and answered at a later time. So here are a few of my questions. Are the funds strictly for the prevention and treatment of opioid overdoses only as it pertains to treatment centers? If not, will a portion of the funds be used to try and reduce the crime associated with the opioid crisis? How much of the funds, if any, will be allocated for the actual prevention of drugs coming in to our communities, which would lead to more investigations and dismantling of the pipelines of fentanyl trafficking? Will the funds lead to more police on the streets, more funding for building up the infrastructure, which would increase the lighting in some areas, neighborhood trash removal with piles of trash being used as stash spots and cover-ups for the dealers' drug inventory? Will the funds be used to improve real estate and home ownership in the communities by fixing and selling of abandoned buildings that serve as drug hubs for people who suffer from substance abuse disorders? These are just a few of the things the community actually needs. Although they are important, we don't need more promises of recreation centers at this time. We don't need more promises of festivals and ice cream giveaways in the communities at this time. That ship has sailed. These things just sugarcoat the real issues that have plagued our community for decades. The times when those things were a real part of the solution has passed. We have entered a time and space when more severe strategies are needed. We need a more aggressive approach. Promises of hope, promises of investments, promises of safety and security, promise of better treatment in healthcare facilities, promise of a rebuild and revitalization of neighborhoods. These are the promises that are vital for our community to thrive and succeed. And they have to be carried out and delivered expeditiously. Thank you for listening. I'm
Thank you.
Damon Marshall, CEO of New Wave Health Services.
Thank you
Thanks.
so much. Colleagues and Sarah, do you all have those? Okay, thank you. I am going to butcher this name, I know. PEP, People Encouraging People? Yes. I'm not even gonna try. I hate when people pronounce my name wrong. And you have 2 minutes.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Achike Oranye, People Encouraging People Division Director. I oversee the outreach to the homeless in the city and also oversee the opioid overdose response team. So we are pretty much on the streets of Baltimore almost every day up to 9 o'clock in the evening. We've been doing street outreach in the city for the past 23 years, starting with the project over at Park Heights Access when we had the HIV explosion back in the years, and then of course every day on the streets of the city. And we did have the event over at Penn North, and my team was also on site. Now, throughout the time, I hear people talk about treatment, strategies, but from the point of a person who's a father and also a parent, the population we are seeing in the city that are most impacted now is young families, mothers with children. And of course, in the attempt to make prevention visible, one of the things that we have seen as effective tool is providing short-term housing, because out of the people that we see on the street, especially the most impacted, more than 70% of those people don't have stable housing. And in the city of Baltimore, especially for us to prevent the intergenerational transmission of trauma, and of course the pain that you have to look at a mother with child, or a mother that's pregnant, going to have a child and is, running the streets, and you know that the biggest issue the person have is struggle with substance misuse. And so we serve more than 350, people every year through our program. And in terms of a touch, we do more than 336,000 touches every year with different types of services in the city. And we do have
30 minutes to wrap up. 30 seconds to wrap up.
So what we are trying to advocate for is for the restitution fund to be deployed, part of it to provide short-term housing for people who are seeking treatment, because that's what I've not seen emphasized in the plan so far. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you. Next, we have Darren Rogers from I Am Mentality. Hi. And you have 2 minutes, sir.
Okay, cool. Good morning, everyone. So first of all, I just wanted to thank everyone who came out. And I'm Darren Rogers, Executive Director of I Am Mentality and also the CEO of Steps Towards Success. And I'm here today just to make an appeal not only for my organization, but other youth serving organizations around the supports that will be provided to individuals who are not directly impacted by opioids. But my question is, what is the strategy for helping children whose parents are being impacted by opioids? What are we doing to look at that? What is the family, structure? What is the family structure investment that we're going to have? Because it's expected of youth serving organizations in Baltimore City to make, miraculous change in the lives of young people. But it's typical for, individuals that I work with to have, limited engagement with their parents. We all know how complicated it is for Baltimore City Public Schools to receive support from family members. If you want to get mom or dad to come to the school, it's very complicated, and it's the same when it comes to youth development. So my appeal was just directly towards what are we going to do just as a city to support our children so that we don't have the reverberation of challenges when it comes to mental health and opioid issues.
Yeah, it's a great point.
Yeah, so that's all I had.
All right, thank you. Mistakenly, I missed one. Dr. Thurston Smith.
Good morning, Madam Chair, esteemed members of council, members of the general public. It's a privilege and honor to be with you here this morning, and just very briefly, I'm also an ordained minister, and nothing on God's green earth happens by accident. I'm sure you would agree. It just so happens I've been here for the past 4 days supporting Mr. Darren Rogers and his outstanding program and an excellent work that he does. Given my background, Mr. Rogers recommended that I share a few sentiments regarding Mayor Brandon's commitment, the council's commitment, Councilman Zeke Cohen, who I know and I've met with several years ago here in support of your work that you're doing here, but to land a few words regarding the importance of us supporting these initiatives. Very briefly about my background. I am retired from the U.S. Veterans Health Administration, where I managed several programs within mental health. One of those was substance abuse treatment programs. I'm a newly appointed program consultant for the National Opioid Response Network, specifically serving Region 4, which is the Southeast. I am a former member of the Shelby County Opioid Task Force in Memphis, Tennessee, where I've served in that role with the Shelby County Sheriff, both city and county mayors, U.S. Attorney, so on and so forth. 3 very important points that I would want to share with you regarding our pursuit of bringing forth, improving health and wellness within the community. Number 1, addiction is America's #1 public health crisis, having a distinct and direct overlap between both public health and public safety. There is no other health-related problem that has a greater impact upon public safety than
I'll allow 1 more minute.
than that of substance use disorders. Secondly, because of the direct correlation between substance use disorders and mental illness, it's imperative that whatever initiatives that we establish, whatever mechanisms, strategies that we put in place, that those mechanisms also account for the value of concordant treatment and simultaneous treatment of both substance use disorders and mental illness. And lastly, given the constructs of the policies established by the Opioid Response Network through the support of the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, projects directly that are funded from the Opioid Response Network can simultaneously include other programs and interventions relating to mental illness. Lastly, there are 3 types of trauma, and I've heard this brought up several times, and 3 kinds of trauma. The 3 types of trauma are acute, chronic, and complex. The 3 kinds of trauma is community, historical, and intergenerational. I thank you for the opportunity to appear before you this morning.
No, thank you so much.
God bless you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for sharing that information. You've described a lot of what we here on the council are grappling with, but with regard to the expertise you have, we're utilizing those same types of constructs here in the city of Baltimore through not only Executive Director Whaley, but also with community-based organizations. So we are in lockstep with what you're saying. Sure, for sure, thank you. Oh, no, you're fine. You're fine. No, no, that's okay. It's all right. Thank you. Do we have anybody else that would like to testify today? All right. Anyone else that would like to testify? All right, hearing and seeing none, I'm going to turn it over to Chairman John Bullock. He worked on this initiative with me, and he's also the second council member, along with myself, that sits on the Opioid Restitution Advisory Board. So, Councilman, did you want to provide some remarks?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for everyone who's coming out today, but also who's been engaged in this topic. As Chair Porter mentioned, we both serve on the Restitution Advisory Board, but also both of our council districts are heavily affected by both the opioid crisis and addiction and overdoses. Not only is this a policy issue, an academic issue, but it's also a personal issue. I know for my family, for some of my friends who have struggled, who continue to struggle. I know for Councilmember Porter, and I know for other members of the council. So we take this work very seriously. Obviously, this is a great challenge, but it's also an opportunity. This is an opportunity for us to right some of the wrongs that have happened in our city. Not to use it as a political football or a chance to score points, but to really do the deep work. I'm glad to hear from folks who are on the ground doing this work, some people whose work I've seen firsthand in the community, without the fanfare, without the attention, without the lights. But at this time, we know this issue has garnered so much attention, not only here locally, but nationally, internationally. But there are people who are really toiling. I thank the staff members of the office who have just recently been set up, but they have been on the ground working. Our goal in this must be transparency, but it also must be reaching the people who do this work on a daily basis and having this continual feedback loop, right? Not just this one directional conversation, but hearing, listening, responding, reacting to the work that needs to be done so critically important that's been going on for years. So again, Chair, I thank you for the work you're doing. I thank you for all the council members that are here because their sincerity is also genuine, and I appreciate the fact that they understand this is not just a parochial issue. It's not an issue in just West and Southwest Baltimore, but this is a Baltimore City issue. This is a human issue. It's a public health issue. It's a safety issue, and it's a family issue for so many of us. So again, thank you all for being here. This is obviously not the first conversation that we've had. This will not be the last conversation that we have because the work will continue until this issue is solved, and that's going to take a lot of work from all of us. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Chairman Bullock. I also want to recognize Councilman James Torrance from District 7.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Deeply.
Not for remarks. Got a little ahead of himself there, didn't he? Executive Director Whaley, I'm going to turn it over to you, ma'am, until you start your presentation.
Thank you, Chairwoman Porter and members of the committee for convening today's hearing. My name is Sarah Whaley, and I'm the Executive Director of Overdose Response for the City of Baltimore. I'd also like to begin by acknowledging the tragic events that took place in the Penn North community last week. We know that the drug supply is volatile in a way that makes substance use increasingly dangerous, and that is what we saw last week that resulted in 27 residents being hospitalized.
Executive Director, if you can speak closer to the mic so we can hear you, please. Thank
Sorry.
you. That's okay.
Thankfully, to our knowledge, none of the overdoses were fatal, in a large part thanks to the quick action of our first responders and the massive mobilization of resources by our community partners, many of whom are here today, and city agencies who were on scene. Their work last week and their continued presence to mitigate harms in the Penn North community has saved lives, and I am incredibly grateful for them. What happened was a tragedy, but one that doesn't need to happen. Every person in Baltimore, including those who use drugs, has a right to safety, and no one should have to risk losing their lives to something that is entirely preventable. What happened last week underscores the critical importance of the work of Mayor Scott and his administration to develop and execute a unified citywide strategy to combat the overdose crisis. This strategy lays out in the clearest terms the opportunity we have to invest funds obtained from lawsuits against the opioid industry directly back into the individuals and neighborhoods hardest hit by this crisis. I look forward to the opportunity to speak to that work today. Next slide. During today's presentation, you'll hear from many folks, the law department about the opioid lawsuits and settlements, the Mayor's Office of Overdose Response on the establishment and government of the Opioid Restitution Fund, the Finance Department on the status of funds received and future disbursements, the Mayor's Office of Recovery Programs on funding allocation and oversight, and we'll conclude by discussing transparency and accountability mechanisms and the ongoing engagement and coordination efforts. And with that, I'll turn it over to my colleagues at the Law Department.
Good morning, Chairwoman Porter, members of City Council, as well as members of the public and my esteemed colleagues. My name is Sarah Gross. I'm the Chief of Affirmative Litigation for the Baltimore City Department of Law, which essentially means that I oversee all of the large-scale litigation where the city is a plaintiff, including the opioids case. I know we have a lot on the table today, but I think I would be remiss if I didn't note the extraordinary efforts of the city in pursuing this litigation for the past 7 years. It wasn't just a Herculean effort on the part of outside counsel in the law department, but it was a true citywide effort, particularly the Department of Health, the fire department, and the police department. The number of man hours that were dedicated from agencies across the city in gathering the necessary documents and participating in depositions and preparing for depositions. It was truly a citywide effort. In addition, I'd like to thank City Council as well for their support of the litigation over the past 7 years. It was noticed and it was appreciated, especially Chairwoman Porter, we appreciate it. So I just wanted to give a little shout out to the members of the city who really advanced this litigation and put us where we are today in terms financially with regard to the settlements. If we can go forward on the slide. And again. So today what I've been asked to talk about is a timeline of the litigation, which will include mention of the settlements, and then after the timeline, I'm going to discuss the specifics of the settlements. But just to keep in mind, there are two kinds of settlements that we'll be talking about today. While I talk about the timeline, there are the settlements that we have specifically with the defendants in our case. Those are part of the Opioid Restitution Fund. The terms for those are broader and give us a little more discretion as to how the money can be spent. The national settlements, which include the bankruptcy settlements, are narrow. They're overseen by the health department and they're not part of the Opioids Restitution Fund, essentially because for those particular settlements, we receive about a 10-page list of approved uses. And for those settlements, we have to file annual reports that show where we spend the money. So in order to make sure that we comply with those approved uses and comply with the reporting requirements, those monies are not part of the Opioid Restitution Fund. Can we go forward a slide, please? Thank you. So this case started all the way back in January of 2018. We filed a lawsuit against a number of manufacturers and distributors of opioids in the Circuit Court for Baltimore City. You may have heard of the multi-district litigation in the opioids case, which is essentially where a bunch of cities, counties, states filed similar lawsuits in federal court, and all of those were transferred into a court in Ohio where they were consolidated for litigation and trial. We opted not to participate in the MDL and filed in the Circuit Court for Baltimore City because we felt it was appropriate and necessary for the people of Baltimore City to, who lived through the opioid crisis here, to make the judgment on what should happen with this case. As you can see, there's a long list of defendants that we pursued, and the list is actually longer because there are a bunch of subsidiaries of these companies that were also included as defendants, but these were the main defendants that were in the case. You can go forward a slide. Thank you. It's very hard to distill 2 months of trial into a couple of slides, but I'm going to try to do that. The case that we brought against these defendants primarily is based in public nuisance. We had a couple of other charges that we brought, but ultimately public nuisance was the one that went to trial. A public nuisance is an unreasonable interference with a right that is common to the general public, particularly with respect to affecting public health and public safety. Some of the allegations that we brought against these defendants were that they misled the public about the dangers of opioid use. They engaged in conduct to encourage doctors to overprescribe opioids and to prescribe them for off-label uses. And they failed in their duties to monitor for suspicious orders and to put a stop to those orders. And then finally, they turned a blind eye to what's called diversion of their pills, which is essentially, diversion is when those pills don't go to the person that they were supposed to. So essentially people reselling pills in that, like in the drug markets. And there was evidence that they were aware of that and they turned a blind eye to that. Next slide, please. So I think this timeline is most emblematic of the reason that we pursued these opioid manufacturers and distributors, and shows the effect of their activities on Baltimore City. In 2011, fatal heroin overdoses in Baltimore had dropped to an all-time low of 76, which was remarkable. But then you look in 2016, fatal overdoses totaled nearly 700 and then began to exceed 800 per year. Now this rise coincided with the peak of the prescription opioid epidemic and the subsequent government crackdown. So what happened is that from 2005 onward, there was the overprescribing of opioids, which happened. And then the government sort of came in finally and cracked down on the use of the overprescribing of prescription opioids and making the individual companies take responsibility for monitoring and that sort of thing. So once the government crackdown happened, there was a rise then in fatal overdoses in the city. And we can attribute that to the fact that approximately 80% of heroin users, according to our expert, got their start with prescription opioids. So essentially, once the government cracked down on their legal pipeline to obtain prescription opioids, individuals then started purchasing heroin on the streets to fill that need that was created by the overprescribing. And then in 2023, the San Francisco Chronicle reported that Baltimore had the highest overdose rates per capita in the country with 174.1 overdoses per 1,000 people. So just this brief timeline and amount of facts shows the significant impact that the actions of the opioid manufacturers and distributors had on overdoses in the city and gave rise to a new opioid epidemic with heroin and fentanyl. Go to the next slide, please. In 2019, the defendants moved to dismiss the complaint, and we held hearings on that. And then you can see there is a large chunk of time from 2019 to 2023 where the court did not really do anything with those motions. Not to say there was nothing going on, because from 2019 to 2023, we're working hard behind the scenes to advance the litigation by gathering hundreds of thousands of documents from the various city agencies, figuring out what witnesses we needed to call, and meeting with experts and retaining experts to testify. Purdue Pharma declared bankruptcy in September of 2019. In 2020, Mallinckrodt declared bankruptcy. And then the biggest event was in 2021, where the state of Maryland reached a global settlement with Johnson & Johnson and what is called the Big Three, which are the big three distributors, McKesson, Cardinal, and AmerisourceBergen, which is also known as ABDC. The projected amount that the city would have received if they had participated was $61.36 million, paid out over 18 years. So what happened is that when we had that offer made, I consulted. Yeah, so I've been told I need to make it faster. So we decided we declined to participate. We spoke with the mayor, outlined the fact that, we'd be receiving less than $3 million a year to address a massive crisis in the city, and it was just insignificant and not what we needed in order to address this crisis. So we declined to participate in the national settlement and went ahead on our own. 2021, Maryland reached the global settlement with McKinsey, which we did participate in. Next slide. Then the second round of global settlements happened in 2022 with Teva, Allergan, Walmart, and Walgreens. Again, we opted out of the majority of those settlements because they were insignificant compared to the damage that we had sustained as a city from the opioid crisis. Although we did opt into the Walmart settlement because we had not brought a lawsuit against Walmart because of their insignificant role here in the opioid crisis. So we did accept that settlement. August 2022, Endo declares bankruptcy. And finally, in March 2023, the court woke up and issued a scheduling order, which started fact discovery. Rite Aid declared bankruptcy in the interim, and then expert discovery started in March of 2024. Next slide. In April 2024, we realized that there were rumblings that settlements were coming. So we had recommended that the mayor's office create a system for dealing with the money, which the mayor's office jumped to it, and you will hear about the creation of that board later. And then the first settlement came in June of 2024. The city settled with Allergan for $45 million. More settlements came after that. CVS settlement for $45 million and Cardinal Health for $152.5 million came in August. September, right before trial, the city settled with Walgreens and Teva for $80 million each, and with Johnson & Johnson. And then trial started, which lasted approximately 3 months. In the interim, Maryland accepted a global settlement offer with Kroger, onto which the city also assigned. They also had minimal presence in Baltimore, so it made more sense in that one to join the global settlement as opposed to going on our own with that. Next slide. In November 2024, the jury returned a verdict against the 2 remaining defendants, McKesson and ABDC, for $266 million. In December of 2024, we had a 2-week abatement trial in front of the judge. February 2025, we had arguments on the post-trial motions and the abatement. In June of 2025, we got an order from the court indicating that the city had to accept a remittitor, which is a reduction in the damage from the jury verdict to about $52 million, or have to go through a new trial because the judge found that the jury apportioning 97% of the opioid epidemic to these 2 defendants was improper. So originally we were supposed to decide by July whether we were going to accept the remittitor or have a new trial. Instead, we asked the judge to tell us what the abatement amount would be so that way we can make an educated decision on the remittitor. And the court agreed to do that. So our new decision date is August 8th, and the court is supposed to issue an abatement amount 2 weeks before that. In the interim, Maryland also signed on to the global settlement with the Sackler family, who are the individuals behind Purdue Pharma. We don't know what the city's projected portion of the settlement is, so we don't know yet if we're going to be signing on to that or not, because we're not sure what the amount is. Next slide. And then these
Sarah,
yeah.
Sarah, if you could just, we have 45 minutes in this presentation. You have about 5 more minutes. Is that okay?
Oh, that's totally fine. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
I'm nearing the end. And then most of these terms you guys are already familiar with because they've already been publicized anyway. So these are the settlements with the defendants that the city actually sued. So these all have general, other than the specific allocations to the various groups, these have the general provision that they must be used for opioids remediation. So unlike the other ones that have specific lists, we just have to make sure that they fit opioids remediation to comply with the settlement agreement. Next slide. And then these are the remaining ones. The only one that does not have a requirement is the $698,000 settlement with McKinsey, which came with no restrictions, but because it's part of the opioid restitution fund, it'll be subject to those requirements, even though the settlement agreement does not impose any restrictions on us. Next. And then the last slide are the national settlements that we participated in. So as I mentioned, these all have a list of approved uses relating to drug treatment and remediation. So all the money spent for those have to fall into one of those approved uses. And then the health department will have to file yearly reports indicating that they did comply with that. And then we still don't know the amount of the bankruptcies for Endo and Rite Aid either, but they will most likely be similar, where they're gonna have a list of approved uses that we have to follow using that money for. So, apologies, I went a little long, but if anyone has any questions.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you. And I just want to personally shout out your work on this as well. You were the one interfacing with a lot of these corporations during the process, so thank you.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
In this section, we'll discuss the opioid restitution fund, how it was established, and its functions. Next slide. On August 29, 2024, Mayor Scott issued an executive order to establish the city's approach to managing the restitution funds received through the litigation that Sarah just discussed. This executive order was based on national best practices and lessons learned from other jurisdictions across the country. The executive order directed the city to take the following steps: to establish a separate opioid restitution fund, and to have this fund be a trust that would sustain for at least 15 years, to establish a restitution advisory board, to prepare an overdose response strategic plan that was informed by a citywide needs assessment, and to develop and publish key documents relating to accountability and transparency of the restitution funds. Next slide. Mayor Scott executive order stipulates certain allowable uses related to substance use disorder abatement for the opioid restitution fund. And what I'm going to touch on may address some of what Mr. Marshall's comments were in the testimony. So the approved uses include program services and supports that address prevention, treatment, recovery, harm reduction, and the social determinants of health to abate harms caused by the opioid epidemic. The infrastructure for these program services and supports, the oversight, planning, assessment, monitoring of programs supported by the Opioid Restitution Fund, and any expenses associated with managing, investing, or dispersing the fund, and then any additional evaluations or outcome reporting related to the use of funds. Next slide. Mayor Scott's executive order established a board of community members to partner with the city to guide the use of the opioid restitution funds through a review of grant applications and funding recommendations. This is the Restitution Advisory Board. The executive order outlines designated seats for persons with professional or personal experience related to the overdose crisis, including individuals with lived or living experience, harm reduction, treatment and wraparound service providers, public health experts, and local city officials. The Restitution Advisory Board's role is to help ensure that Baltimore City residents have a seat at the table in the decision-making process for the use of the opioid restitution funds, and to ensure that funding recommendations are in alignment with the findings of the needs assessment and the strategies contained in the overdose response strategic plan. The Restitution Advisory Board will make recommendations that go to the mayor for final approval, and the Restitution Advisory Board is co-chaired by myself and the Health Commissioner. And I will pass now to my colleagues at Finance.
Good morning, Chairwoman Porter, members of the committee, Laura Larson, City Budget Director. I'm going to walk through how we have established the accounting structure for these funds, as well as what has been allocated out of the funds. So if we want to jump ahead to the next slide, and then we can go to the next slide after this. So the Opioid Restitution Fund was established as a special revenue fund in the city's overall chart of accounts. And what that essentially means is that the dollars are segregated from the city's general fund, and they're set aside for the allowable uses that have been established for the fund. Within the fund, they live in a hierarchy that's similar to how you see dollars in the budget when we go through the annual ordinance of estimates. So dollars get appropriated within in an agency. Within that agency, the dollars live within a specific service, and even more granular, they get assigned to a specific activity. That is where the dollars get budgeted based off of the spending plan that is submitted for various programs, and then that is also how the dollars get spent. So that this structure is what allows us to monitor the budget to actual spending for these programs. Again, one of the items that I want to stress is that this structure segregates the dollars from the general fund, so there is no interaction between the two. The other item that's important to note is that this fund is a multi-year fund, which essentially means that unlike the general fund, if there is a balance at the end of the fiscal year, it automatically carries into the next year until those appropriations are fully exhausted. That mirrors other special revenue funds in the city. It also mirrors how our federal and state grant funds are set up. So if we go to the next slide, we can take a look at what's been appropriated from the fund since its inception. So before we talk about the budget piece, let's talk about the revenue that we have as of today. So as of Monday, the funds received in the opioid restitution fund were about $236.8 million. We anticipate receiving an additional $23.4 million by the end of calendar year 2025. The amount that we're talking about here is net of the legal fees that were associated with the external counsel that represented us as part of this litigation. And it also it does not reflect any amount due to the city that is subject to the ongoing litigation that Sarah was mentioning, which is why you see a smaller amount than perhaps what you've seen previously reported in the media. So we have made two appropriations out of the fund. One of them was an action of a supplemental budget that was approved by the council last spring for $14.6 million. And then the second action was part of the fiscal 26 ordinance of estimates, which was adopted by the council in June. So in the supplemental, we appropriated about $14.6 million. And in the fiscal 26 budget, there was an additional $36.7 million appropriated. So in total, the council has authorized spending about $51.4 million out of the fund, or 22% of the balance of the cash that we have on hand today. If we look at the actuals, in fiscal 25, the spending was limited. We only spent about $530,000 of the $14 million that was appropriated. And what that means is that there just were some timing issues in terms of when the supplemental was ultimately passed, and then just the process of getting things up and off the ground in terms of getting those dollars out the door. So that the $14.1 million balance from fiscal 25, that appropriation still exists. Agencies will still focus on spending that down. And so we do anticipate, just as some of those timing issues sort of work themselves out, that we will see those expenditures take place as we move into fiscal 25. So if we go to the next slide, I now want to pivot and talk a little bit about how we are approaching the annual budget process for these dollars and what the oversight for the funds look like. So on the next slide, we can see sort of a graphical depiction of how all these things come together. So all of the funding allocation decisions from the fund are ultimately going to be oriented around the strategic plan that is being finalized for these dollars. We'll use recommendations and insights from that plan to establish priorities that'll come through in the annual budget process, and whereby we can evaluate different requests to determine what should be funded on an annual basis from the fund. Those appropriations will live in agency budgets, just like I sort of walked through in terms of the accounting structure. And you'll see those dollars get allocated to different things. So city-based initiatives, so those will be dollars that would get allocated to specific city services, or perhaps specific capital projects associated with combating the epidemic in line with the allowable uses from the executive order. We have dollars that are being allocated for those commitments to the organizations named in individual settlements that Sarah was walking through. And those are grants that are being administered and overseen by the Mayor's Office of Recovery Programs. And then finally, there'll be additional grant-making opportunities where additional dollars from the overall fund would be made available for and put out on the street on an annual basis. So next, on the next slide, we can just sort of see how this plays out as in relation to the city's budget cycle. So as I mentioned, the process starts with establishing the plan as we develop the annual budget. Again, we'll pull priorities and guidance for evaluating requests directly from the strategic plan, and that will be how we evaluate the requests that are submitted by various agencies. Those requests then get reviewed and evaluated by the mayor and the senior team as part of the overall budget decision-making process. And then the council and the Board of Estimates will see those recommendations reflected in the annual budget. Once the budget gets authorized, there is quarterly and ongoing oversight, both in terms of how the dollars are being spent, but then also what sort of performance are we seeing in terms of the various services. So consistent with how you hear my team and I come in and talk about the quarterly budget projections as part of our general fund review, we would also be reviewing agency spending through that quarterly process. Also, services that are receiving funds through the Opioid Restitution Fund will be providing quarterly performance updates. That's in line with the city's performance plan process, and we'll be able to report out what sort of progress we're seeing. And then finally, that same process for monitoring will happen with any of the community-based organizations or named organizations through ongoing oversight that's performed by the Recovery Office. And then finally, at the close of the fiscal year, we'll be able to do a year-end report out. So through Director Whaley's team, there will be annual reports that are issued in terms of what progress was made and how funds were deployed. Through the budget office, we'll be able to report out on the year-end spending and what we saw in terms of actuals. And then through a coordinated effort with the Office of Performance and Innovation, we'll be able to monitor the overall performance specifically of city agencies as well as our nonprofit providers to look at what sort of progress we're making to the overall goals stated in the strategic plan. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Elizabeth Tatum from the Mayor's Office of Recovery Programs, who will speak about her office's role in oversight and administering these dollars.
Thank you, Director Larson. Good morning, Chairwoman Porter, members of the committee. I am the acting director of the Mayor's Office of Recovery Programs, and our office was named in the Mayor's August 29th, 2024 executive order to provide grants management and oversight for these funds. Next slide, please. I'll start by speaking about the named organization grant-making process. As Director Larson was speaking about the budget and how funds are appropriated, the budgets for the named organizations sit within the Recovery Office, and our office executes the grant agreements. So I'll speak about what that process looks like, where we're at in making those awards, and then I'll also talk about very specific oversight mechanisms. There are 22 named programs totaling $87 million in grants. These are all multi-year grants, and they're of varying lengths, and we always have the opportunity based on needs that we are seeing to extend grants further in time or even to spend more quickly based on need. The review process that I'll walk through here is really designed to make sure that the scope of these grant agreements is in line with city priorities, that it is, there's a collaborative approach to making final decisions about what the budget looks like, what the scopes of work look like, and ensure that we're not duplicating efforts or operating in silos. So I will speak first about sort of the initiation of the grant-making process and the development of scope. So Director Whaley's office, her and her colleagues conducted a series of site visits with each of these named organizations to better understand the programs and services that they were proposing, and then provided them with written feedback about a variety of different programmatic questions. For example, questions about harm reduction strategies, or questions about which neighborhoods to focus on. So that's how things started with the site visits, and then a post-site visit memo with recommendations, and then the grant application. From there, the grantee completes an application and a risk assessment. That risk assessment was developed by our office based on, we did make some modifications to the risk assessment tool that we used for ARPA, the American Rescue Plan Act funding, simply because this is a different funding source with a different purpose. But we did deploy that in concert with BC Moore. And then from there, once we have the draft application, our office and BC Moore review the application together. So our office has expertise and experience in overseeing large federal grant dollars. We know compliance and grants management in the city's financial systems very well. Director Whaley's office has expertise and experience in the content of this work, in the public health portion of this work. And so we are in communication with her office on a daily basis, and we move together and have discussions about what is appropriate and what is going to meet the needs of the city. And then we also engage other partners within the city, of course, the health department, the fire department, homeless services, and other leaders, to make sure that our office we are not just in the business of approving a grant application and executing a contract. There are lots of folks that can do that. Part of the work that we're doing is making sure that the right partners are at the table, and that we're having the right conversations before we move out and execute a grant agreement and commit these precious dollars to these initiatives. From there, the grantee receives feedback, resubmits the application. There's sometimes an iterative process of a couple rounds of review and revision, and then we draft a grant agreement, and then we sign and submit it for BOE approval. Next slide, please. This is, what you'll see on this slide here is the status of all of the named organization grants. In the first category, you'll see the 8 organizations that are at the grant agreement stage. I'm very pleased to report that as of this morning at the Board of Estimates meeting, the Board of Estimates approved $5 million for the Be More Power teams, which are within BHSB, Turnaround Tuesday, and then also $10 million for 988 awareness and outreach. We have Baltimore Safe Haven and Helping Out Mission that we are targeting for the early August Board of Estimates. Then there are 10 organizations that are still in the grant application stage, where we are having discussions about scope, having conversations to plan and ensure that we are in agreement with budgets. And I'll provide an example. I won't name the organization, but one organization is interested in using their funds for a large capital investment. So we're having discussions about not only what would these funds support, but then what does sustainability look like once these funds are exhausted? And can they support this capital investment? And how do we ensure that we complete due diligence on all of those things? And then there are 4 organizations that have requested a delayed start simply because of where they're at in their planning and implementation processes. Next slide, please. And then Recovery Office oversight, we're applying many of the best practices that we put in place as part of the American Rescue Plan Act oversight. And in some cases, because these are not federal dollars, and also because, again, this is, ARPA was very broad, and we funded everything from the City Hall roof to violence prevention. This is much more focused in its scope. So we are, in some cases, developing new grant management procedures or revising ones that we already had in place. And the strategies or the tools that you see here are not exhaustive. They are examples. So I've already spoken about risk assessments, which help determine reporting frequency, and level and type of monitoring. Grant agreements, which include detailed scopes of work, fiscal year level budgets and work plans. We also have financial policies attached to each of those grant agreements, which are decidedly not exciting things for folks who are outside of grants management, but they are important for accountability and to ensure consistency across our different grantees. So things like, how do we allocate staffing costs and track time that people are applying to this grant? What are our financial reporting standards? How do we disperse funds? How do we handle indirect costs for administrative overhead? And then lastly, we have a cycle of different monitoring activities, which includes monthly performance and status reports. And I know we'll speak more about that later on in the presentation, periodic site visits, document reviews, performance meetings, corrective actions, and the like. And with that, I will turn it over back to Director Whaley to speak about the named organizations and how they are connected to the city's broader strategic plan. And then she'll also speak about community-based grants.
Thank you, Director Tatum. I'm going to expand a little bit on how we've ensured that funds that are being allocated to the named organizations align with the citywide strategic plan. But I want to start by stressing that the 22 named programs were named in the settlement, and this was not a competitive grant process. There will be future competitive grants. Just wanted to level set there. So we have been thinking about how to allocate the funds to these 22 named organizations in alignment with the citywide strategic plan, but also thinking holistically about the city's approach and attempting to eliminate any duplication, improve coordination and collaboration between the organizations, and work to meet the needs of the city while ensuring quality services to the individuals that use them. You have a few examples on the slide here. I'm not going to dig really deep into them, but just want to name a few of the organizations that are connected directly to the Penn North community, just as a case example, or that are part of the city's broader overdose response. Be More Power was mentioned. This is a harm reduction outreach team that's made up of peers. They were one of the first organizations to answer our call for outreach workers in Penn North. Part of their scope of work will include expanding their harm reduction outreach and ensuring that they have the ability to respond to overdose cluster data that's provided to them by the Baltimore City Health Department, or to be activated as part of a response similar to the event that happened last week. Penn North Recovery is another organization. This is a community-based resource center in the heart of the Penn North community that delivers essential services to that community. Penn North's scope of work is still in review, but we are providing technical assistance from the BC Moore office and the Mayor's Office of Recovery Programs in partnership with Penn North to ensure that there's alignment with the city's strategy. And then the last one is the Peer Navigators Program. This is a partnership between the Enoch Pratt Library, the Maryland Peer Advisory Council, and Healing Cities. This program trains individuals who have firsthand experience to become certified peer recovery specialists or peer trainees. They provide a safe, non-judgmental space to assist community members through various phases of their recovery journey. They are one of the organizations that has requested a delayed start for their scope of work since their next cohort of peers doesn't start until the end of the year. Next slide. Again, not going to go into a lot of depth here, but there are several other named organizations that provide, that will provide work in the Penn North community, but also broader. There are two that I want to draw your attention to. These additional initiatives will expand our response system. This is B-Corps and the 988 outreach. B-Corps is a multifaceted intervention plan that includes low barrier linkage to care and social supports. And then 988, we are investing $10 million in education and outreach across the community so folks know what 988 is and when to call. Next slide. Again, as I mentioned at the top, there will be an additional request for proposals that will be released for additional grant opportunities for community-based organizations. This will be released in partnership with the Restitution Advisory Board. These proposals will be consistent with the Overdose Response Strategic Plan, and the Restitution Advisory Board will evaluate the proposals and make recommendations on these proposals to the mayor. Next slide. I'd now like to discuss the mechanisms put in place to ensure that our use of the opioid restitution funds are transparent and accountable to the public. Next slide. Per the mayor's executive order, the city will release a transparency and accountability plan that will be updated at least every 2 years. The city prepared a draft of this plan that was available for public comment. The draft plan proposed a number of items, including a website, an annual report, and then broader impact evaluations as needed. Currently, a subcommittee of the Restitution Advisory Board is working to incorporate the feedback that we received from the public and will prepare and finalize that draft for the mayor's approval and then release. Next slide. In addition, the city will maintain online dashboards that will help promote public accessibility of information related to the city's overdose response and the use of the opioid restitution funds. This is a mechanism used by other jurisdictions across the country. So for our opioid restitution funds, we're currently building out a publicly facing dashboard. We have a landing page right now, but are building out a more extensive dashboard that will provide information on the programs that receive funding, and metrics related to where they are in the process. This will be done in collaboration with the Mayor's Office of Recovery Programs. In addition, there's another dashboard that I want to uplift that promotes transparency of our work. As part of the overdose response needs assessment, the Baltimore City Health Department released a dashboard on their website that is maintained by epidemiologists from the health department and tracks key health outcome measures. Next slide. Now we're going to expand on the part of the executive order that outlines engagement and coordination. Next slide. In the last hearing, we began by outlining the key players and their roles in the behavioral health ecosystem here in Baltimore. There are a lot of folks who touch this crisis through their work, and it is a very broad ecosystem. So part of BC Moore's mission is to coordinate the city's overdose response. Doing so effectively requires coordination across all of these key partners in the city, including city agencies, community-based organizations, and folks at different levels of government. In recognition of this mission, the Overdose Response Strategic Plan is really rooted in engaging and coordinating with key partners. Some listed here. It provides a framework for the city's overdose response in collaboration with service provision across multiple agencies, city agencies, and the Behavioral Health Systems Baltimore, as well as community-based organizations. And it also proposes alignment with state and federal policies that are directly affecting the work that's done here in Baltimore. Next slide. The work and our success will depend on the relationships and partnerships that exist and that we continue to build. At the city level, there are several interagency collaboration meetings that take place regularly to ensure various city agencies are engaging and coordinated on the overdose response. This includes the mayor's overdose cabinet that has been established to ensure the mayor, city administrators, and agency heads are coordinated on key issues related to the overdose crisis. Overdose Stat occurs in partnership with OPI to monitor progress on key performance metrics. And the Overdose Working Group meets every other week to ensure frequent interagency touch points on the day-to-day work on implementing the executive order and now implementation of the strategic plan. Next slide. In addition, there are a variety of public meetings that bring together community-based organizations working in the space and that are open to members of the public. Key city agencies lead these meetings and help to ensure collaboration across sectors. Some of these meetings include the overdose prevention team meeting, which is required by the state of Maryland and led by the Baltimore City Health Department. This group works to identify gaps in resources and share relevant data and promote collaboration. The Overdose Fatality Review, also mandated by the state and led by the health department to review cases of overdose deaths with the goal of better understanding why overdoses occur and how to better prevent them in Baltimore. The Restitution Advisory Board meeting, which was established again by the mayor's executive order to ensure that residents have a seat at the table in decision-making of the opioid restitution funds, and the Behavioral Health Collaborative, which plays a central role in the system transformation work that is needed to satisfy the requirements of paragraph 97 of the consent decree. Next slide. BC More is also engaging directly with community partners and community members in various forums. As mentioned, we did site visits with the 22 named organizations, but have also done site visits at other programs and services across the city. We've held networking sessions with the named organizations to promote collaboration between our on-the-ground service providers. We are hosting listening sessions throughout the city to receive feedback on the proposed draft strategic plan, and we participate regularly in community meetings focused on the ongoing work addressing the overdose crisis. We've also engaged in intergovernmental partners. Oh, next slide. We've also engaged with intergovernmental partners at various levels of government, including at the federal level, where we convened an overdose response roundtable with Senator Angela Alsobrooks. At the state level, we have regular check-ins with our counterparts at the Maryland Office of Overdose Response and other relevant state agencies. We've also joined the Baltimore City Health Department and other partners for advocacy days in Annapolis, where we can advocate for state legislation on key overdose response priorities. And at the regional level, I personally have monthly check-ins with counterparts in other counties that are leading ORF work in their jurisdictions. Next slide. To expand a little bit on the importance of the intergovernmental engagement and to help us illustrate how the work of the Overdose Response Strategic Plan cuts across varying levels of governments, there are a few examples on this slide that are pulled from the proposed strategic plan that leverage the partnerships to maximize impact of our opioid restitution funds. I want to stress that the Opioid Restitution Fund is just one of many funding streams that exist in the city to address the overdose crisis, and part of the work in this collaboration is finding different funding opportunities that can be used and leveraging the ORF to fill gaps and supplement other funding sources. So this work is not siloed just to the Opioid Restitution Fund. Some of these examples on the slide address things that were brought up in the testimony, the coordination with the state to help ensure the criminal justice system, those connected to the criminal justice system have connection to treatment while they are incarcerated and upon release. Housing was brought up in the testimony. It was called out specifically in the strategic plan It's one of the social determinants of health that was identified pretty early on in the needs assessment. In every conversation that we had, housing was something that was brought up as a need. There are more examples on this slide, but I'll kind of stop here and just summarize by saying this work has been going on for a really long time, and that our office is new, but the mission is not new. But we are at the beginning of a new chapter with a new focus and with these new resources. And Chairwoman, you said at the top of this hearing that this is an opportunity. Mayor Scott and his administration agree that this is an opportunity, and we are poised and ready to meet that opportunity head on with these resources and thinking more broadly again about the entire ecosystem.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you. Just before we go into questions, colleagues, I'm going to forego my questions for the sake of time, given that I know you all have quite a few questions. I just want 2 committee requests. One, Executive Director Whaley, one of the resounding themes throughout this entire conversation from public testimony was making sure that the public is engaged in the process. So you and I are going to come up with a plan that includes not only the council member, but also community-based organizations within the area, those that have received funding and those that have not received funding, to see how we can develop that toolkit to get this information out. I have heard that, there are the same organizations that are getting the funds every time and time again. So we need to address that issue and have a real evaluation criteria attached with it. My second committee request, and this is actually to you as well, we're going to be developing a toolkit, a public-facing toolkit that council members can use to push out to their organizations and push out to their community, listservs, members, and things of that nature. Given the state of this crisis within each of our communities, I think that it's imperative that we communicate not only within this chamber, but also within our respective council's offices as well. Please feel free to use us as partners, use this committee as partners, as thought partners, to establish kind of that breaking of the silos that we are seeing in community, but also to be facilitators of those types of conversations that we all know very well that are happening in community. And I believe one of the testimonies mentioned territories. So we will use us as thought partners and facilitators to break those types of territories that we are seeing in our communities. I'm going to go to Chairman Bullock to start us off on the conversation. Colleagues, you will have 2 questions. Given the nature of time, please feel free to ask your question as close to your public remarks as possible. I don't want to stop you within your train of thought, but I will. So Chairman Bullock, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And again, thank you everyone who's done work on this issue. I want to get to the settlement funds. That's one of the most significant issues that we're dealing with. And we know that the amount likely has been reduced significantly. Can we talk about how that's going to affect operations moving forward, not only with potential funding rounds, but also those who have been previously funded? Could you just talk about how you're planning to navigate that process with a limited amount of resources?
Thank you. I think that's a great question. And that is part of the basis for this strategic plan. So thinking again about what is the work and who are the different players and the different funding sources that should lead that work, and the opioid restitution funds using that to, again, fill gaps or maximize the impact of services, so supplementing other funding sources or filling gaps where other funding sources can't be used. And I'll use the example of federal funding cannot be used to purchase sterile syringes. So using different funding sources to fill that federal gap is an opportunity that we have. Not saying that we're doing that, but just saying that as an example of something that we could do with the opioid restitution funds.
Okay, that's helpful. And then one other quick one. I'm thinking about, you know, the 9th district, the 10th district, the 7th district. Obviously, there's a whole host of listening sessions that are happening. We've had meetings within this chamber. Can you talk about to what degree or how that feedback is being implemented into the approach moving forward, just the geographical focus of the attention?
You'll see throughout the strategic plan that we make reference to neighborhood or populations that are more severely impacted. So we are trying to focus the concentration of services and supports through the opioid restitution funds into those most impacted communities. We are doing listening sessions in those neighborhoods to get that direct feedback. The plan is just a draft, and so we'll be updating the plan after we reflect on what we've heard in the listening sessions to make sure that we're addressing the needs of those communities specifically.
Just want to say thank you. We know this work is not easy. It's very complicated. So again, just thank you to the attention and diligence that you're providing. So much appreciated.
Councilman Conway?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for holding a hearing. I think this is a really, really important opportunity for the city to make some significant headway on an issue that's plagued us, frankly, for decades, but has gotten significantly worse in the last decade. So appreciate you bringing this forward and having us have an open conversation about this funding, how we got it, what it means for that funding. I have a couple of questions just to clarify. First, it would help me to understand the amount of money that we've been awarded thus far, to be clear, and then what is still potentially on the end. I know we still have the abatement to be decided. You did mention that. Once again, thank you for your work. You guys did phenomenal work here, and I'm incredibly proud of the work of our law department. And we wouldn't be here without the incredible detail you guys have put into that case. So I want to start there. Can any of you tell me where we are now with the total amount of money?
Yeah, so we have gotten all but one payment from the settlements that have already, the settlements that we reached with the defendants. There's one final payment that's due in December of this year from Walgreens. It's the second half of their payment, but other than that, we've received all of the outstanding payments for the settlements with the defendants. Some of the national settlements are paid out over a period of time. I think the Kroger settlement is paid out over 11 years, but it's a very small settlement, so we're just gonna be getting 11 years worth of small payments for that particular one. The money that is yet to be on the table, we obviously haven't decided what we're gonna do in terms of the jury verdict, if we accept the reduction or if we go to trial again on damages based on the parameters that the judge set up. And obviously there's the potential for appeal down the road, no matter what happens with that. On top of that, we have the Sackler settlement that, although I can't tell you how much it's gonna be. I don't know how much our portion is gonna be yet. Essentially, I know that Maryland has signed on to it and that at some point in the upcoming weeks, they're gonna give us a calculation of what the city's portion would be, which is based on population. So our portion of these settlements are always the biggest. So unfortunately, I don't know how much that's gonna be, and I don't know whether we're gonna take it or like if we're again gonna go on our own and try to get more from the Sacklers. So those are just the potential funding sources down the road, but I wish I could tell you more about how much that would be, but there's a lot of variables in there right now.
I didn't realize I asked such a complicated question. I thought it would be an easy, $400 million. And apparently it's not that simple, and I appreciate that. To that effect, if I can make that an official request and maybe provide that level of detail. This is the awards that we have confirmed thus far. Caveat that all of that can be challenged. This is what we've received thus far. This is what's still pending from the abatement. This is what we've been encouraged by the judge to accept, but have not made a decision on. We can break that out by columns, but I do want to, because it leads me to the piece that I'm eventually trying to get to here.
And real quick, Laura and JD, you have that?
Yep, we received it. And a certain level of that detail is in the deck from today's presentation, from the finance slides, in terms of the current balance that we've received, the amount expected to be received by the end of the year. But we've made note of that committee request.
Sure, and I asked that question because I didn't see the final number in the slide deck, and so that's why I asked the question. I thought it'd be an easy answer, but apparently it's a little more complicated, and I appreciate that. So I wanted to then be able to ask the question, how much are we expecting to come off the top for legal fees? Has that been decided?
So legal fees have been, normally we don't reveal that, but I believe it's already been made public. The fees in this case are a third, which is industry standard. So every time we get a payment, those fees are taken off the top. And then we also had to repay Sussman for the amount that they fronted us for the litigation expenses. So we're paid up on the litigation expenses, but for whatever comes forward with the appeal, if there is one. So right now we've paid for all of what we've owed them for the last 7 years of them lending us the money for the legal fees. For the litigation expenses, which are separate from the legal fees. So the only remainder that is left, that is outstanding of guaranteed money is by December 2025, the city will be receiving $23,450,000 from Walgreens, and attorney's fees will be $11,550,000, and it's 35 million, but they get 11.5 million and we get 23.45 million. So that's the remainder of the guaranteed money. And then the rest is all unfortunately up in the air with the judge's decision.
Okay. And I don't know if we're able to then provide that within that request. So out of each of those amounts coming out, how much will go to legal fees? I don't know if that would come off the total or how that's negotiated. I would certainly leave it up to you guys for the data request so that it makes sense.
I have it all broken down. It's in my notes app, so I can put it into a grown-up professional
I appreciate that.
spreadsheet for you.
Now, part of what I'm trying to get to is I know there was a little bit of frustration from the restitution fund board about the final amount of money that they would be looking into distributing. If I remember from reports, it was about $2 million. And that was in part because we'd negotiated on the front end for $87 million to go to a list of 22 organizations. And I was curious about that. Is there any wiggle room in those organizations? How were they chosen? I think I'm familiar with many of them, not all of them, but the ones that I am familiar with are phenomenal organizations. I'm just really kind of curious about the process there and how we came to that decision.
So it was part of confidential settlement negotiations. Unfortunately, I can't get into them. It's not the city's fault. It was lawyering and discussions behind the scenes that were part of the confidential settlement negotiations between us and the various companies. So unfortunately, I can't elaborate more on that. Sorry.
Sure, and I think what I'm trying to get to here, finally, I didn't love the fact that we had this pretty large nest egg already determined before we'd received the full nugget. And I think that's part of the frustration that we've heard from folks on the restitution fund board as well. And so it doesn't give us quite the flexibility that we want to see. Now, I think we still do have a lot of flexibility on the rate at which we decide to give that money to those organizations so that we can spread the pot to other organizations sooner. But I think tying our hands, I don't want to say behind our back, but restricting what we can do with the amount of money that we have, especially when it's such a large amount of money that must go to these organizations, I think it becomes difficult for us from a planning perspective. And I think what we're seeing, as shown in the presentation, is we are now trying to back into having those organizations do things that we want them to do, and not necessarily things that they do now. So I just as a learning process, we've never done anything this large before, so this is the first time we're doing it. I would say net extremely positive, but I think as we think about these opportunities in the future and we do those negotiations, if at all possible, I think we want to make sure that we don't make those decisions without having input on the front end. Because I think the report that we put out, and I unfortunately have not had the opportunity to read the plan yet, but I think that's going to be incredibly informative to making sure that we're tackling the main issues at hand here and not missing an opportunity. But with the ability to only put up $2 million, with the exception of those organizations, we probably are missing opportunities in the first couple of years.
And Sarah, real quick, just to follow up on Councilman Conway's point, talk to us about what that legal process is, why it is so rigid, and more importantly,
I'm sorry, why is
so
it
the
so-
legal process you mentioned was that we had the set amount of organizations and dollars that were in the settlement. Talk to us about that a little bit, because I think, to your point, Councilman, like educating the public on what that is and how that impacts these further processes as well.
Okay. So I don't think it's breaching confidentiality of the negotiations to say that the purpose in naming organizations in the agreement was, acknowledging that the opioid crisis is now and wanting to get some of the money out the door faster, because we knew that this infrastructure would take some time to put together and develop, that there was a motivation to get money out to the organizations, some organizations sooner rather than later, and get the money out into the community and start working. But I do know your concerns about, taking away some of that money, and certainly we'll consider that in the future. Opioids, I think, is, I will say it's probably like a once in a lifetime case. But you never know. There's always a next opioid.
Yeah, we don't want another. Hopefully.
Yeah, so we'll definitely keep that in mind in the
Sure.
future, and I appreciate you bringing it to our attention.
Sure. No, just to follow up on your point, thank you so much, Councilman. Councilman Torrance, and then Council.
If I could ask one more question, this is a very brief one. And this is regarding the city council's role in oversight, because typically funds go through the general fund. This is a separate fund, and I guess this is a question for Laura. In the budget books and through the budget process, are we going to be calling out opioid restitution fund allocations within the budget book so that council members are able to identify that and ask questions specifically regarding how it aligns with the plan?
Yeah, so this year we added an entire section dedicated to the opioid restitution fund where we spelled out each of the appropriations, and we will continue that practice. Within, the agency detail book in the agency chapters, you're going to see it live under the special fund category. But you'll have if you reference, our summary documents that describe the special fund appropriations, you're going to see all of the detail that you're requesting.
Thank you. Thank you for clarifying.
And also, Councilman, to your point, regular briefings with the council members on a monthly basis. Is that what we're looking at? Monthly? Quarterly? Quarterly basis about the opioid restitution funds, but also having reports that will be sent out as a public-facing document, similar to the ARPA funds that came to the city. And that was very important to myself as well, making sure that the council has some sort of not only oversight, but also integration within the process, vetting these organizations, suggesting organizations that may or may not have been used before. So that's all a part of Director Whaley's plan as well.
Can I also just add to that, for the $2 million for the Restitution Advisory Board, that's just for 1 year, and they are building out that RFP process, and with your role and Councilman Bullock's role on the board, can also help to make sure that those components of how we are scoring those applications, what they go out, are in alignment with council as well.
Thank you so much. Councilman Torrance?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to first start with a comment. I'm thankful for the response that we received from the mayor's office, but also community organizations. It speaks volumes to see not only community organizations as well as government working together to respond to a crisis. As someone who has lived through someone who has experienced opioid addiction and understanding that it is a public health crisis within itself, I'm a little bit timid right now in terms of how we address this. One, in terms of the reality of persons won't seek help until they hit rock bottom. So how do we do appropriate harm reduction? But also recognizing that this is so complex to the point where I can tell you that a person could be a returning citizen who is leaning on opioids to escape, or a mother who's dealing with the crisis of not making enough money to actually escape. This is something I wholeheartedly think this fund is good for in terms of addressing those broader social determinants that lead to people being addicted to substances. For me, I would like a committee request, what is a briefing on the organizations who are being awarded funds in Penn North, particularly as I've seen an influx of organizations looking to partner and be a part of the recovery, but I also want to make sure that it is meaningful. I spent this morning in Penn North with community members on the ground discussing it, how this is we have it in two legs. We have the developments that's taking part in Penn North with a brand new rec center, the renovation of homes, parks, and green spaces that we're creating. There's the harm reduction that we desperately need more of, especially with our peer navigators. But there's also the minutia. I would like to make sure that we have a sub-cabinet meeting for Penn North, one where we're looking at every prong from development to public safety to investments. That way we are digging down to the specific plans. I think my neighbors don't need a citywide plan. I think they need a Penn North plan. I'm gonna say this, I think this is layered, and I'm willing to sit at the table with you as well as our state officials to figure it out, but I think my request is to look at, and this is my official request, is a timeline on when we can assemble a sub-cabinet where we have agencies and partners together discussing the actual interventions that we can do. But also more broadly, my next committee request is for your dashboard. I would like to see a draft of it. One, explicitly aligned with the grant applicants. I would like to see it drilled down to the point where I can look at zip codes by the persons that they're servicing who's impacted. That way the data is meaningful to me and my neighbors, because I am one of 4 council persons that represent 21217, 21216. So I would like to know that data down to the minutia in terms of neighborhoods impacted, but also a heat map of who service, so that we can make sure that, as someone who represents both the white owl and the black butterfly, my heat map is very clear. I have overdose spikes in Hamden, and I have overdose spikes in Penn North and Sandtown. I want to make sure that those maps are reflected of the services being authored through this fund. With that being said, I'm going to turn
And so real quick, I'm sorry, can you repeat those 2 committee requests? I just want to make sure that the administration has them.
Oh, I'm a
Or can you send them via writing?
I'll do both.
Okay, thank you.
So first request is a timeline on when we can assemble a sub-cabinet for the recovery, drilling down to specifics. In addition to that, I would like to know, there's actually 3 requests, the specific grant applications for the persons who will be servicing Penn North. In addition to that, I would like to see a draft of your heat map, a draft of the dashboard, as well as GIS mapping related to the services that are rendered to persons by zip code, age, sex. That helps us to be more data driven, because one of the largest groups of people who are impacted by this crisis are, I have to blank there, Gen X, not Gen X, is it Gen X? Gen X black men between ages 40 and 64. Gen X, close to it, close. I just want to make sure that we are looking at the data and drilling it down. So those are my 3 requests, and look forward to conversations.
Sure, thank you so much. Councilwoman Ramos?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for hosting these hearings. I apologize for missing the last one. And thanks to the Law Department, obviously, for your just amazing work and everybody here. Director, you had talked about in every interview that housing came up. I know my colleagues knew exactly where I was going here. Housing came up every single time. And the needs assessment actually only says that that 22% of our folks were housing insecure, which is a totally low number. It is way more than that if you actually use the housing insecure definition, which is right now in Baltimore City, all of our renters, out of all of our renters, 50% of them, more than half, are paying more than a third of their income on rent. And that is the definition of housing insecure. It is a really big deal. My colleague here talked about the fact that, vacant properties are an issue. As a matter of fact, the day on Thursday, 179 vacant properties were checked to make sure that we weren't missing anyone who may have been. Yes, ma'am, I'm going to keep going with my question. So my question is this. In the strategic plan, housing is the 10th out of 13 strategies. It seems to me like we need to put a much greater emphasis on the prevention side relative to housing. And I'd like to understand a little bit more about, and maybe this is the mayor's office, how that's going to happen, because it seems to me, similar to what my colleague just asked, that we're going to need to put a group of people together that's going to come up with that strategy and what that money looks like. And we've got money coming in now to deal with this issue of the vacant properties, but it's really, really going to be critical to move in that direction. Yes, ma'am, that will be a committee request I think we need to put that group together to make that happen. So Director, can you address this a little bit? And I see Director Simmons here from MOHS as well, who's absolutely has to be part of this equation as well. I'd like to really work through that, and I'd be happy to convene the group.
Thank you for that question. And I will stress that the strategic plan is not in any particular order of importance. They are all important. Every component in the strategic plan is important, but I hear you, it being down in the middle, hear that. In terms of the coordination and collaboration, you pointed out that Director Simmons from Mayor's Office of Homeless Services is here. This is also going to take coordination and collaboration across city agencies. Again, this is why we're thinking about this more broadly than just overdose, because housing is a risk factor, it's a preventative factor, it impacts this in so many different ways, and so it's something we have to address holistically in partnership with other agencies that are working in this space towards getting our residents housed.
So we'll work together on that because I'd really think it's important. But I also want to add the vacant property piece. Penn North right now is not in one of the catchment areas to be able to get investment that we've been talking about for the vacancy reduction, which I think is a mistake. Because if we look at where our vacant properties are and where our health disparities are, they're the match. They totally match. So I want to make sure that we're addressing that as well in this group. So my second question is totally on a different plane, and that is the role of our hospitals. If substance abuse is to be treated as a public health issue, as Madam Chair has been very clear must be and is, how are we engaging our hospitals to make sure that it is actually treated that way? There are some cities that actually have worked with the hospitals to invest in housing, which we've done on a very minor scale so far. Sojourner Place is one of our victories in that regard. But I want to understand a little bit better what the partnership is with our hospitals, because if we're asking for folks for treatment on demand to be ready when somebody is ready, they should be able to walk into a hospital and get that treatment, right? And it also spins with, Medicaid is going to go down, we're going to need some other way. Like, what is the role of our hospital system here? We have the best healthcare in Baltimore City. We have the best healthcare in the world and here in Baltimore City. So why is it that we have such a crisis if people are not being treated?
Great question, and I'm pulling up notes. So as part of our, hospitals are absolutely a partner in this whole ecosystem and part of this citywide response. In addition to our site visits at community-based providers, the VC Moore office has also been doing site visits at various hospitals across the city. Hospitals are named within the strategic plan, ensuring that our hospitals are functioning at the highest level of care to serve people with opioid use disorder. That's in Strategy 11. I will also note that one of the 22 named organizations, the B Corps initiative, again, a multifaceted intervention, increasing access to low barrier care. Part of what they are doing is working with the hospital systems as well to ensure that there is that bridge of connection to treatment services through the hospital. So there's some training and technical assistance for hospitals in that area. It really is going to be a partnership, and hospitals are a huge partner in this.
In addition, Deputy Commissioner Martin, could you talk about levels of care and the peer specialists in hospitals?
Good morning, Jennifer Martin, Deputy Commissioner at the Baltimore City Health Department. Thank you, Council Chair Porter and members of Council for this hearing this morning. So in addition to what Director Whaley shared, the Health Department has been working with our city hospitals for many years now on our levels of care program, working with them to institute best practices from across the country around provision of harm reduction services in the ED, as well as connection to further care, which could be treatment if the individual is ready to enter into treatment. We continue to work with our hospitals on increasing the number of hospitals who are providing the highest level of services as outlined in the levels of care. And as Director Whaley mentioned, part of the B Corps project is to look at providing additional technical assistance to our hospitals to be able to fully implement that program.
Madam Chair, if I can ask that maybe for the next oversight hearing that we bring one of our hospital partners, because I'd like to hear.
That's already a motion.
I'm sure it is. Okay.
No, you're good. No, yeah, and so just to
Thank you.
kind of give you all some context, I personally, just given my expertise, met with B Corps about like a year and a half ago, and I provided some guidance on how they should operate their program, but also just making sure that the levels of care that they use not only align with hospital institutions, but one of the issues that we're having is making sure that intermediary period between what you're talking about, a person experiencing homelessness and going into the hospital, that intermediary period is something that has never been quite aligned. And so those folks can't necessarily go into our shelter options because of wound care, different things like that, but they also are living on vacant properties and things of that nature. So that intermediary period, that's really what I want, what I want us to focus on, but I definitely hear your point about integrating, vacant housing in our hospital systems. But that intermediary period from when a person is experiencing homelessness, the aspects of wound care and drug use and substance abuse combined, and then also to when they get into the hospital system, when they integrate into that system as well. That's very important, and it hasn't been clearly defined.
Yeah, agree. And also the fact that a lot of the requirements to get into shelter as well as into housing is that you have to be clean. And, but yet we know that in order to do that and be stabilized, we need to have people in housing. So, I'm interested in that part of the conversation when we get the group together. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilman Parker?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, everybody, for the conversation, for being here today. Starting, I think, with Director Larson here, just to drill down again on some of the numbers and where we're at. As I read it right now, thank you so much for the great information in here. Currently, by the end of the year, we'll be at 260 million received. There's that 52 million which is sitting there, and so for the moment, let's for the moment, let's put that in for purpose of my thing. So 260 plus the 52 on the named organizations, again, incredibly helpful. Thank you so much for putting that together and giving us a understanding of where they are. That's 90 million across those, if I added up the columns correctly. 87. All right, I appreciate the precision there. So then we're looking at essentially 220, including the 52, right? 220 there that we have to work with over the 15-year period to support both the city agency response and the community-based organization response. Remind us in fiscal year 26 that we're coming into, how much ORF money are we using for the city agency side of things? What was that total?
So in fiscal 26, we are appropriating approximately just over $36 million. Those dollars are that includes approximately $2.2 million for the Office of Recovery Programs, Director Whaley's office within the mayor's office, an additional $4.8 million within the health department, and then an additional $10.5 million. That would include the allocations to the fire department, the mayor's office of homeless services, and the law department.
Great. I know we're looking at a 15-year window of sustained work here. And so taking that 220 divided by 15, right, if that's where we're at, that's just under $15 million a year that to be used both by city agencies and by our community-based partners through the RF. Of that 36 million on the first, obviously 36 million just on the city side is unsustainable given those numbers, and we wouldn't have enough to sustain that for 15 years, let alone increase costs, let alone having anything for the RF, right? So of the 36 million then, what's our current best? Some of those may be one-time expenses as we get things rolling. Do we have any sense of what the city agency side of the 15-year response will cost on an annualized basis in years 2 through 15?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things to keep into context here. So I think some of the figures that you're referencing there, we might be double counting. So again, let me just sort of break down the 36.7 in the 26 budget. So there's $17.4 million allocated for the grants that are the named organization grants.
Great. So that's not part of it. Yeah. Okay.
$2 million allocated for a new grant making process that would be overseen. $15.2 million that would include the health department allocation, the fire department allocation, as well as homeless services and the law department. And then the remaining portion is going to the oversight dollars for the Director Whaley's office and the Office of Recovery Programs.
Great.
So in terms of, I see where you're going, because you're taking these numbers and you're multiplying them into the balance and you're saying we don't get to 15 years. So one part of our—
Not without more good work by the law department.
That's correct. That's correct. So I think there's a couple of things at play here. Number one is when we built the 15-year plan and when we were making the decisions around the 26 budget, we didn't have the judgment that came from the abatement trial, and that we didn't expect that.
Yep.
And that was a material change to the balance of this fund. And so we have to know, as we work on the fiscal 27 budget, we're gonna have to take into account whatever strategy the law department determines to pursue on behalf of the city and adjust expectations accordingly, depending upon whatever that strategy is. The other piece that is helping us to leverage and expand the potential reach of these dollars is something that you heard us reference when we were describing the executive order, which is structuring these dollars like a trust. And so right now, we have sort of the biggest lump sum that we will have in this fund ever, right? Because we're spending money every day. And so what we are doing is we are working with a financial advisor to invest those dollars separate from the city's general fund cash assets in order to be, right now we can be a little more aggressive with our dollars so that we can try to maximize interest earnings. And what we're doing is we're trying to then recycle those interest earnings back into the fund so that we can hit that 15-year goal.
Granted that anytime you're working with an advisor on a fund like this, it's complicated, but within in internal planning, I'm assuming conservative number, what's your hopeful return on investments?
I mean, so I'm just looking at my tracking now. So in fiscal 26, the city was getting, depending upon where we were at, the city was getting anywhere between 3 and 4% interest returns on our sort of overall cash investment. So if we assumed 3.5%, we're getting about $7.2 million based off the current principal. Now, because this is a little different than our general fund cash assets, we can, what we've been doing is we've been consulting partners from the pension boards as well as local partners in philanthropy to talk about how they structure the investments around their endowments, because this is closer to an endowment structure than it is to, sort of our bread and butter investing. And we believe that we can get a much more aggressive, we believe we're trying to hit a much higher number. So just for context, my colleague in the finance department, Deputy Director Senemi, cited that we were getting a investment return in one of our pension systems that was almost triple what we were able to get from the general fund just by being more aggressive. And so we are in our infancy in terms of our work with the financial advisor to get all of that set up. It took a little bit longer because I'm leading that project and I got pulled away from it for the fiscal 26 budget, but it's my goal to get that up and off the ground this fall so that we can, again, maximize these dollars.
I really appreciate all that, Director Larson. And so, I think my hope here is that today to kind of establish where we are, recognizing there's so many variables at play, but then just to make sure that as numbers fall more into place, on your side and on the law department's side, to be able to communicate effectively to the public, this is with greater precision, the resources we expect to be available on an annualized basis. This is how much we plan to use for vital city services to address our strategy, implement our strategy, and then this is what we expect to be available through the RF. And just the faster we get there, I think the better off all of us will be, recognizing that there's only so much we can control about that. But I really appreciate the work you're doing there. My second question has to do with, yes.
Hold on one second. Councilman Conway has a direct follow-up.
Thank you. This is very brief. Thank you for explaining the reinvestment strategy. I think it's a great idea and very wise of us to do. With regards to the funds that come off of that reinvestment strategy, have we decided whether or not that's going directly back into the fund, or if that would be, like go into the general fund and be a flexible? I don't know if we made that decision yet. I'm curious.
So we're in our infancy, but the vision that the mayor had laid out with the executive order is that all of those proceeds would go back into this trust fund. And that was how we sort of landed at trying to hit that 15-year horizon.
Got it. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And then for Sarah in particular, I think this is more straightforward, but specific to the ORF process, RFP process, when do we expect the RFPs to go out for the $2-ish million available this fiscal year?
Yeah, we're hoping to release that RFP, I would say early fall. We're building out that process right now with the Restitution Advisory Board.
And given that this is all starting for the first time, for FY27, do we anticipate that process beginning earlier? Potentially could applications begin late this fiscal year in anticipation of FY27 money?
I don't know if we've mapped that out quite yet, but I think a lot of the work that we're doing now is like building those processes. And so once those processes are in place, we can move quicker.
Great.
If I could just add, we do need a fiscal year 27 approved budget in order to do the fiscal year 27 public grant process, so that timing is a factor in when we can release the public RFP.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Deputy Chief of Staff. How will, in terms of the work of the opioid restitution fund and the evaluation of those proposals, how will the 5 strategic priorities and then the 13 strategies in there, what role does that play in what you determine to fund? Are we looking to equally fund between those funds and the funds that are to the named organizations and to the city? Or, I mean, what's the, how can organizations know which kinds of projects will be a priority given the broad scope of the strategies and the other players who are contributing to it?
Yep, so what we're working on right now with the Restitution Advisory Board, they are reviewing the strategic plan. $2 million is a decent amount of money, but it's not, like you mentioned, not enough to go to every one of the strategies and priorities. So the Restitution Advisory Board will have to hone the scope of that RFP down. So as that RFP goes out, there will be a clear scope of what is funded through that RFP process. And so organizations will know before they apply what they can apply for.
Great. And the strategic plan is still in process. It's still being worked on, right? Within that, at what point in time do you expect to be able to name particular metrics for each priority area and each strategy in there in terms of this is how we're going to track success, and also this is what we want our organizations to focus on impacting in terms of data that we're tracking?
Yep, we're building out on that right now. So there's metrics that the 22 named organizations are, their metrics have been set.
Great.
So those are the metrics related to the granting process. In terms of the strategies and priorities, we're working with OPI right now to define some broader, kind of more impact metrics, so how we are meeting the goals of the strategic plan. And so the performance output metrics that we get from grantees will inform and kind of feed into this process, so we can see ultimately how we are moving the needle and addressing the overdose crisis as related to the strategic plan.
I really appreciate it. If I can make then an official request around for the named organizations to be able to see that breakdown of what those outputs and outcomes are, what we're measuring, and also what the plan is to inform the public, inform the council of success towards achieving those outcomes.
Yes, and I will say that the metrics that we're using with the named organizations and with grantees are based on a bank of metrics that were released and vetted by different public health organizations across the country. CDC is releasing their metrics I think at the end of the year, but we were able to see those earlier on. And so have built based on a standard that other jurisdictions are also using to map their ORF funding. So our metrics are based on that bank of metrics.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much. We're going to do another round of questions. I think myself and Councilman Conway are the only ones that have leftover questions. I want to first start by going back a little bit to how we determine prevention. One of the slides indicated that we've been tracking the prescription opioid abuse to heroin usage. Executive Director Whaley, are you all collaborating with like prescription drug monitoring programs to identify individuals, to target them for prevention services? One of the issues that I'm bringing up is those types of prescriptions are tracked federally through a prescription monitoring program, and it may be an opportunity to work with our state level partners to integrate those prevention strategies into what we're doing here, particularly to Baltimore. Have we explored that opportunity?
So I think that is an important component of this, and I will pass it to Deputy Commissioner Martin to expand on that.
So the PDMP program is run and managed by the Maryland Department of Health, and they've established the criteria around how they will share data with other jurisdictions. Currently, the criteria that are in place with the state are related to closures of facilities or when providers lose their prescribing license. But this is an area where I think there is opportunity as we're engaging in the strategic plan to reopen that conversation with the state around how the state is thinking about using PDMP data.
And the reason why I bring that up, and I'm going to talk technical here, we have the PDMPs that are integrated into CRISP. And so CRISP is and Epic are the indicators and, the software that most of our hospital institutions use. And so if we have 80% of our individuals that we know did that jump between prescription opioids to anything greater, we are able to see that, and we're able to target them and see how we can provide prevention services. Yeah, so that's the connection that I'm looking. The data interoperability between the agency and us is going to have to be solidified a little bit more if we're ever going to combat kind of those individuals coming back into our city, where those services should be deployed, how they're being deployed, and who they're being deployed to.
Appreciate that. And also just to add on, so PDMP data does feed into CRISP, as you mentioned, and as part of the overdose fatality review, we are able to access that data, and it is part of those fatality reviews that the health department helps to convene and facilitate. I think what you're talking about is certainly a broader approach to thinking about that data, and definitely one that is worth continued discussion and exploration.
And even if there's integration from hospital institutions within that overdose fatality review, like if hospitals can be involved in that conversation, because most of them are seeing these individuals pretty frequently.
Yeah, so as part of the overdose fatality review process, we do invite providers to be part of those conversations around the specific cases that are selected for discussion. It's not always easy to get them to the table, but we do make efforts to invite them, and that would include hospitals if they've been a provider of services to an individual.
That's great, thank you. And then I wanted to talk through the breakdown of these funds within city agencies. Executive Director Whaley, how are you all evaluating based on allowable uses of these funds? How are you managing that within city agencies? Because I think that some of my colleagues brought up these points of if the lion's share of these funds are going to city agencies and we're only touching them during budget season, we have to have some sort of integration there. And so how can we, as a council, better integrate into that process?
So in the slides, we talked a little bit about how those services will be monitored not only from a financial perspective, but also from a performance perspective throughout the fiscal year. So we've established performance metrics for each of those services that are receiving opioid restitution funds. They will, as part of performance plan reporting, they would report back on those metrics on a quarterly basis. Those items get reported out on the performance plan updates that are shared online for folks to take a look at on a quarterly basis. We will also coordinate with OPI, the Office of Performance and Innovation. So where we have statted agencies, so that's largely the fire department, where we would monitor the performance impacts in the stat setting in terms of how these funds are being deployed and what we're seeing from a performance perspective.
And just so that we're clear, performance metrics, one of the key questions that I have to that is how are we measuring success? Is it a reduction? Is it, an increase in quality of life services? Talk to me about how you all are developing those success metrics for these agencies.
Yeah, and so, working with the I think I can talk a little bit about how we think about this in the budget perspective, and then I'll turn it over to Executive Director Whaley to talk about how her team's involved. But, you know, from a budget perspective, you know, we want to see for these various services, you know, we always talk about a family of measures to try to get sort of a comprehensive understanding of how the service is performing. So how much are you performing? How well are you performing it in terms of turnaround time or cost per unit, or, you know, case per input per unit? And then is anybody better off? And so what is how are we seeing the ultimate community impact of what is happening? What I would envision is that on a quarterly basis, we're going to be able to see movement in terms of outputs, you know, the number of units that are being produced. And on an annual basis, we'll be able to hopefully really understand how the needle is moving on some of those more outcome-driven items. I will say, like, where we are in term, you know, in many cases, this is establishing new service delivery that the city hasn't done. And so a lot of what we're going to see in fiscal 26 is just tracking the progress towards getting positions in place, getting people hired, getting contracts in place, like getting all that infrastructure in place so that we can start delivering these critical services as soon as possible. And so what we're tracking this year in terms of monitoring progress might be more so around, you know, how we're getting things in place. And then hopefully as we move into fiscal 27 and beyond, we would be digging more into sort of being able to assess impact.
And I believe it can be a both and conversation,
agreed.
Because I think that one of the major issues that we're running into is the items that you mentioned were more quantitative in nature, number of units, but I would love to see, you know, some more qualitative data that we're gathering, particularly related to quality of life, not only for the individual, but also for the respective community, whether we are seeing a reduction in, you know, open air drug markets where some of these individuals frequent, whether these individuals are, you know, staying in recovery and housing for an extended period of time, whether it be 6, 9, or 12 months. Like, I believe that, you know, while this year we are setting up the infrastructure, I think that foundationally we should be adding those quality of life metrics to the conversation at the onset, because it'll help us establish the conversations where we are seeing in, like, the treatment centers, when we're seeing in recovery homes. Those are the types of behavioral health quality measures that will add to the conversation and add to the true, you know, the true conversation, and not just not just like number of units and number of persons served, because that really doesn't tell us whether they've been truly engaged in this process or not. Okay. Councilman Conway?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with everything you just said. My question actually goes back to some testimony that we got earlier. I think it was Mr. Graber talked about the various things that have an impact on opioids and addiction. These are environmental concerns, public safety concerns, housing concerns, trash, things that are all elements that lend themselves toward the addiction and then eventually the overdoses that we see within our neighborhoods. And when he said it, I couldn't agree with him more. I'm curious, as we think about this pot of funding, and I was looking at the slide that we put up for allowable uses. It seems like it's pretty narrow and a focus towards programming and treatment and mental health and stuff like that. And I agree those things are probably going to be the most direct ways that we have an impact here. But the way I tend to think of things is in systems. We can give someone the right medication at the right time. We can support an individual at the right time, but the moment we walk away from that person, they are back in their same element. So we have to implement systems. And so I'm curious to that effect, in light of some of the testimony that we've heard, what flexibility we have there, and how are we thinking about that? I know this is an executive order. We can always change that. But how do we make sure that we don't find ourselves so narrow in our focus, also not so wide in our focus, but so narrow in our focus that we can't permanently solve the problems in the neighborhoods that we know we have these problems in. Because it's not just about addiction. It's about the open air drug markets. It's about the housing quality. It's about the blight. And certainly I don't know that we want to start, taking down vacant homes with the $400 million that we have. I wouldn't say that. But I do think, when we're thinking about police response, police intelligence, coordination with communities, and so on and so forth, I think there's a real opportunity here to make sure that either we use these funds or we coordinate these funds with those efforts in a very, very thoughtful way. So I sort of pitched that question, to all of you as we think about how we spend this money.
Thank you, Councilman. I'll start by saying that our approved uses are actually more broad than the MDL requirements. So what our friends across the state and across the country have to work with. Ours are more broad than that. One component that we have that they don't have is the mention of social determinants of health and the wraparound services. And so in the needs assessment, in the conversations that we had, they weren't solely focused on substance use disorder, but also what are the other systems that you talked about needed to be in place in order to support an individual through their recovery or as a preventative protective factor. And so we have that flexibility within the executive order to address some of those wraparound services. As we are thinking about how we are funding organizations and what we are funding them to do, again, thinking broadly about the wraparound services that are available to individuals so that as they get into treatment, they also have housing. As they are engaging with a harm reduction provider, that they also have food. So thinking more broadly around that. And I think to your point around systems and building up a support network, not just providing resources, but really thinking how we can build systems and structures so that individuals are not reliant on programs for these things like housing, food, transportation, et cetera, but how we build out the infrastructure of the city. And like you said, $400 million is not enough to do that. Again, stressing why we are breaking down silos, why we are thinking about this holistically, because we can't do everything with this money, but if we can think broadly about how this crisis and the individuals impacted by it hit different city agencies and different infrastructures, we can build that out with a collective goal in mind.
It's really good to hear. I'm glad we do have a broader scope than the rest of the state. And we talked about this being a public health issue and a public safety issue and how they intermingle between the two. And both as a member of this committee and as a chair of the Public Safety Committee, I continue to offer myself as a partner and a resource. I want to make sure that we actually make a significant difference here. I think we have a real opportunity to dramatically change the narrative and the story of our city, not just on violent crime, but I think finally also with some resources on overdoses. So I appreciate it. And thank you, Madam Chair, for the opportunity.
Thank you so much. And so as we begin to close this hearing, I just want to underscore some things that I heard today. Community, I hear you loud and clear. Transparency is a huge issue that we want to make sure that with these funds that we're communicating out to you all. Number two, ensuring that folks in CBOs that are actually doing the work are funded, are adequately funded, so that we're not continuously seeing the same operators of these funds. I hear you loud and clear on that as well. And then last but certainly not least, educating the public and true engagement of what is allowable with these funds and what is not. I want to underscore that point because this is not going to be a silver bullet or a magic flow formula that is going to change every issue that we are seeing in Baltimore. We understand that we have a lot of complex issues in Baltimore, but under my leadership within this committee, we'll definitely make sure that we're using these funds to the best of our ability, and we're creating a space where we are working in partnership and collaboration with the administration, with all of the agencies, and most formally, community members as well. This is, again, a point in time where we will more than likely never see this level of funding again for our city. And it's going to change a generation. There have been many generations that have been lost because of this crisis. However, there is an opportunity here for generations moving forward to be benefited, and Baltimore as a collective, as a whole, to truly be transformed in a way that we have never seen before. And I'm speaking on behalf of myself and all committee members, and I would garner to say the council president. We understand that, and you have all the brains that are thinking through this issue on a very, very complex basis, but also making sure that it's actionable and tangible, that we're seeing within community as well. So thank you all so much for coming today, and we understand that the lives that have been lost are not in vain. We understand that the lives that have been lost from this epidemic, this crisis that we are seeing in our city, that we've seen in our city, are not in vain, and we will uphold them at every step of the way within this committee to ensure that their families understand this issue, but they understand that this issue is not falling on deaf ears, that we are actively taking a role with our jurisdiction as city council to make sure that we truly change Baltimore. So thank you all so much. Have a good day.